How's it going? Dave from Comic Book Investments. So I'm going to do a follow-up video to the video I did on Comic Link and MyComicShop. The reason why I'm doing a follow-up video because I've been in contact with MyComicShop recently, and it's only fair that I share their side of the story because obviously they maybe don't have a YouTube channel or Instagram to share their side. And as having a bigger audience, it's on my YouTube, it's probably beneficial and just nice to share their side of the story. Also, it brings up an interesting point that I talked with them and I talked with my brother about how you give the GPA your sales data, because it makes it very interesting. And this was me and my brother went back and forth on like, okay, how do you do it? Well, if we do it this way, then there's this problem. If you do it that way, it's this problem. Same with MyComicShop. So that's going to be an interesting discussion, and I'm kind of curious what you guys think about it. I'll tell you what MyComicShop does, and I'll tell you what we're going to do, and maybe you guys can like fill in and give other suggestions that I'm not aware of. But in any case, catch you up with speed. Basically, MyComicShop sold this book recently for, according to the GPA, for $114,000. If you look right here, you can see on the GPA that one recently sold for $114,000. This was MyComicShop, and then the person that bought this sent it instantly as soon as they got it. They sent it over to Comic Link, and now it's in Comic Link's auction, and it's right here. And this is the same serial number, same one, and it's up for $55,000. And you're thinking, well, that's odd. He just bought it for $114,000, and one just sold for $75,000. Another weird thing was a 5.5 right here sold on Heritage just a month prior for $55,000. So when I looked at this, and I wasn't the only one, I found this out through Instagram, through multiple people. Why would you pay double the price right here, $114,000 for one that you bought in November? As you can see right here, it sold November 4th, I believe is what the thing says. November 4th, it sold for $114,000 when this one just sold in Heritage a month prior for $55,000. Why would you pay double? Not to mention that there's also one listed currently, and it's been listed since October for $70,000 for a 5.5 on eBay. So that just sounded my alarm bells along with other people's alarm bells, and I did a video about it. Well, MyComicShop has reached out to me, but they also did a post on the boards talking about how this was a timed payment thing, and they have their time payments are 6 months long. So technically 6 months prior to this, the person bought it in May, was actually when they really bought it. But the way they calculate their data is they don't give the GPA their data until the book has been 100% paid for. So if you went back in May, if you look at the sales in May, 117, 103, 115, 120, that's perfectly in line with the fair market value during that time. It wasn't until June 17th one sold for $75,000, and then it wasn't until October that one sold for $55,000. So clearly going down at that point. So, but I didn't know that. No one really knew that, but that's how they calculate their data. Another thing, which this is my bad, 100%, I said that sometimes it takes a couple weeks for me to get my orders. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, I get my orders really quick. I was talking about auction orders. I do not use their marketplace buy it nows. I have randomly, like maybe once a year, I'll buy something from their marketplace, and in those instances, I do get them instantly. Now, their auction orders, I do get those very quickly as well. Usually, the buy it now stuff is like next day. They'll ship it out the next day, and then whatever shipping times are. And then auction orders are usually within a couple days as well. Now, the reason why I said that is sometimes I remember hearing about this in class, like it was, I think, a psychology class or something, and they're talking about how someone could be afraid of planes or flights because they remember one time that they had a really bad experience, but they don't remember the other 100 times that the experience was fine, because the bad ones always stick in your brain more than the good ones. So when I used to use, I've been using MyComicShop since I've been in business. So over 10 years. And when I first used their auctions, they used to ship them slow. And then they would also, I actually stopped using them for a while because I used to buy, lots of raw books, and they would ship them, the medium flat rate. boxes that are like literally the size of a comic. So when you put them in there, if it literally gets any damage on the corners, that would break that would like bend the corners of your box. They shipped in a box very similar to that. It wasn't a medium flat rate, but it was similar size, where if any damage happened to the box, it would damage the corners. And I would get literally my entire shipment of comics would all have dings on the side. And I complained multiple times to my comic shop. I ended up stopped using them. Again, this was 10 plus years ago. And then I stopped using them for a while and then went back to them and they fixed it. They were on 100% fine. They ship in much bigger boxes now and no damage happens to them at all. This is probably when they first started doing auctions, and it's a learning curve. Trust me, I'm doing auctions. It's a learning curve. Things you think you know, and then all of a sudden, once you have to ship out 1,200 books, you're like, maybe I should rethink that, because what seems to happen maybe less than 1% of the time, if you only ship out 100 books, in a given period, it's like, it happens barely at all. But once you start shipping at scale, thousands of books, then all of a sudden that 1% happens quite often. So yes, they are 100% fine. I would recommend using them. I have no ill will against them. So that is the point of kind of like this video. Like, I have no ill will. This was at the end of my video, last one, towards the end, which most people probably didn't watch. I literally said this was speculation, and this is just based off of the limited information I have. And I don't really know what's going on, but this is just me kind of talking. That's in the last video, and that's the same as this video. I really don't know what's going on. All I have is the information presented in front of me. And so, yeah. But I've been in contact with them, and yeah. So the shipping thing, that was on my bad because I'm remembering old time. But then I went through my recent data with them, and I'm like, oh, they actually do send on time and everything like that. So, yes, that's fine. My bad. So I also recommend Comic Link too. I've had no issues with Comic Link at all, any of this kind of stuff. I'm just, everyone kind of knows about the heritage problems. Like, there's a huge video, and I was like a part of it, where Heritage was caught shill bidding, market manipulation, especially on their video games recently. Jim Halprin also got in trouble with the government for coins back in the 80s for the same thing. So, when I see this kind of stuff, I'm very leery, and I try to get to the bottom of it. Some people might say, like, why didn't you reach out to My Comic Shop first before you made the video? My experience, not with My Comic Shop, but past, no one responds to me. So, and, once I make the video, then people tend to respond. But until then, that's just kind of how it is. So, yeah. So now this brings to the bigger question. How should you report the data? So the way that My Comic Shop reports their data is once the book is 100% paid for, then they report the data. So this person bought it back in May. But the reality is, like, I was going back and forth with my brother. It's like, because we're going to start reporting data, how are we going to report the data? So we already said from the beginning that if it's like an auction or something like that, or a buy it now in the marketplace, until the person pays, then it's not going to be reported. For example, we have books that people never end up paying for. They commit to buying it, say in the marketplace, I want this book. We put it in the orders, and then they never pay for it. Well, we're not going to report that sale because it wasn't a sale. So it has to be, they have to have paid for the book. So if it's an auction, let's say our Journey to Mystery 8350 that we had in auction, that person is supposed to pay soon, but we're not going to mark it as sold, so we won't give it to the GPA until it's paid. Now, that's kind of like what My Comic Shop is doing, but it's different with time payments. That's where I think they made the error, right? And trust me, I didn't really think about this until this happened, that I got to because we would have done it the same way, not really thinking about it. But this is where the error happens, because this book sold for $114,000 back in May. It did not sell in November. And you can't retroactively go back and fix something on a GPA, because once you do that, if you start messing with data, people will be like, hey, why have all of a sudden is the data changing, on a whim? And it'll just make, less trust in the GPA, thinking that they're screwing with the data. So the way I see it is someone does, for example, we had a Morphun 73, first Aquaman. That guy took a year and a half to pay for it. Nothing wrong with that. things come up where people can't pay. They start paying for a while and then they can't for a while. And then, you just work with them. And that happens. Some people can't. It was a bigger book. But if the thing was that sold a year and a half ago, not sold now. So the prices would be way different. Just like this one. It looks like it sold for $114,000 when the most recent one for $55,000, but it actually sold back here when it was normal. And it wouldn't raise any red flags, but now it does. So that's a negative. That's a really bad thing. So what we're going to do, MyComicShop said they're going to look into their system, maybe work. I don't know what they're going to do. But what we're going to do is if we have a time payment, the day that they decide to commit to buy and they put us the first payment, and the first payment for us is usually between 20 and 25%, and that is a down payment, and that is non-refundable, so people don't just make a payment and then I want my money back. So once they make their first down initial payment, that is the commitment to buy. It's sold. It's sold. The reality is most everyone finishes off their time payments. We've never had anyone not finish off their time payments, make like 3 out of 6 and then, disappear or not want it or something like that. They always finish making their time payments. So that's how I think we should do it. Because I look at the same as like if you go to the store and buy a t-shirt and you put it on your credit card, technically you've never paid for that book, but it's marked as a sale. Right? And you just have to eventually pay it off. And it could take you a year to pay off that t-shirt. I don't know what your financial situation is. But that's how we're going to do it is when you make your first initial payment. So for this book, it would have been back in May. They make their first initial payment. Maybe my comic shop should use this way as well. And then that way it would have showed up here and no different. No one would have, it would have just been, and then if that person ends up not paying, well then my comic shop keeps their initial down payment, gives them the other money back, and then they have the book and they, sell it again. Now it could run into that problem. It's like, well, what if you have to sell it again? Well, if you look right here, this one was through Heritage, this, 1975 one, and they sold it again. Clearly, what Heritage is doing is once it sells, they give them the data and it may be not paid for. Or it could be that this person paid for it and then instantly turned around and then sold it through Heritage again, losing tons of fees in the process and all that stuff because they have to pay taxes on this too. So, yeah, what I think of the My Comic Shop and the Comic Link book, that's this one right here, I think usually, I believe it's called, is it Occam's Razor? The easiest path is usually the correct path or something like that. I'm butchering it. But usually the simplest answer is probably the correct answer. Most likely what this person did is they bought it from My Comic Shop, made time payments. They then paid off the book, and by the time they paid it off, they're like, crap, the market's gone down. I need to pay off my mortgage. This comic book was a bad investment. I'm never going to recoup my investment, blah, blah, blah. I need to get rid of it. Let me sell it now. And then they just threw it up in Comic Link's auction. Why they didn't use My Comic Shop? Because they have auctions? I don't know. But nonetheless, they probably just needed to get out from under this book because there's a lot of people like that. They get caught up in things and like, oh, I'm going to buy this book. And then they're like, oh, I finished making payments. Oh, it's dropped by 50%. I need to get out from under it. This book will probably go for like 60 to 65, somewhere in there, I'm assuming. And so I think that's basically what happened. I know I speculated that maybe Comic Link and My Comic Shop were in some kind of cahoots to boost the sales number. But, I mean, can you really blame me when you see a book sell for $55,000 on Heritage, then sell for $75,000 on, what was this one? This one was Heritage as well. And then all of a sudden sell for $114,000 when you literally could buy one for $70,000 already. So it just makes it look weird. I think if they change the way that they do time payments, like obviously if it's an auction book or a buy it now, once it's paid, it goes to the GPA as a sale. But if you're doing time payments can be anything. It could be 6 months. It could be 3. It could be a year and a half. What if it's 2 years? We've had people that take a long time to pay and we work with them. Usually it's like, this is your what you're going to do. And then they just like, oh, I can't make a payment this month. Oh, I can't make a payment this month. Oh, I can't make a payment. Something happens, and it's like, okay, we'll work with you. Obviously, if you're dealing with your own, this was their own book. They said that they bought it from Golden Auction, which I have right here, for $103, and that is true. So they did buy this book, so it was their own book. It's different if you're working with someone else's book and you're doing time payments. That's a little tricky. But I think the best way is to, once the person puts down the initial payment for the GPA, is to send the payment to the GPA. Because if you send it, because here's the thing, if they waited till this was paid for, $114,000, and they then told the GPA, which I don't know if the GPA can do this, hey, mark this instead of November 4th, mark it for like May 4th. That would then screw with the data here too. Maybe not this book particularly, because it has stuff that's all around the same. But then people would have based off from May all the way up until, now, the price that they want to pay, and then all of a sudden you throw this monkey in the wrench and it's like, whoa, this old data just appeared out of nowhere. Like, that would be weird to me as well. So I think that's the only way you can do it, is once for time payments, is once it's initially paid for. Yeah, that's the only thing I can really think about. We talked at length about it, me and my brother, on how we're going to do it, and that's the way we're going to do it. And I think that's probably the best way, unless you guys have a different way. There's obviously going to be negatives to both sides, but I think the negatives to waiting, like MyComicShop did, is definitely not good. Because now, not just me, imagine all those other people that don't have YouTube channels, that don't have Instagrams, Facebooks, whatever it is, or don't have a big enough following for people to see, are now looking at this and goes, this is weird. And they think the same thing I thought and what other people have thought. And then they just go, I'm not going to use them anymore. And so it's not really to their benefit to post late sales. It just really isn't. And I can't speak to the other auction houses and what they're going to do, but this is how we're going to handle it. And again, I have no ill will towards MyComicShop, my Comic Link, all that stuff. I did the video based off the information I had, which was limited at the time. And now that they've come forward and said kind of like what they happened. And yeah, I think this is still a good thing in the end, because it brought to light this time payment thing in the GPA, which me and my brother never really thought about before. And we can see how it can be actually a really bad thing for people, and people not trusting because they feel like they're doing something shady. Because let's face it, there's a lot of shady stuff that happens in this industry. And, we want to try to be the best we can be. And that is, releasing accurate data, the most data we can. Comic Link does not release their data to the GPA for whatever reason. I do not know. But this is, this is how we're going to do it. We think this is the best way. There's obviously going to be flaws and everything. Just like the CGC has flaws in their census, so many people crack out books and don't submit the labels back. And so you have a bunch of ghosts on the census, which basically means books that were cracked out that shouldn't be on the census anymore, that don't actually exist. So there's a lot less that actually exist on the census. If you check up the census here, it's like, how many of these 9.4s right here were cracked out? So trying to get that 9.6, and maybe they submitted 3 or 4 or 5 times. So really, maybe of those 7, it could only be 3. How many times did this 7.5 right here at 46 Universal get cracked out to get that 8.0? Because the 8.0 for a 7.5 is a big jump. And they submitted it 5, 10, 15 times. Not 15 times the same book, but 15 of these were people that cracked them out and tried again. So now you have an extra 15 and a 7.5 that don't actually really exist. So it's hard to get accurate data. I'm trying to do the best we can. I ripped into Go Collect, and they went the exact opposite of MyComicShop and decided to try to take down my video, which they did take down my video. But MyComicShop did reach out to me, and we talked it out, and they explained their side, and I get that. Go Collect, they haven't changed their ways at all, and they report data that is inaccurate, which can affect people in their decision, their financial decision. I think this is a big financial decision when you're spending $114,000. So you really need to have the most accurate data that you can and use as much tools as you can. I use the GPA. I love the GPA. That's why I'm trying to do the best I can to make it the most accurate. I can only speak for myself. That is it. I did not mean to make this a 20-minute video, so I doubt most of you guys will even see it to the end. But give me your suggestions. All right, thanks. Bye.